And yes, we are live. I'm here with my new friend Jamal. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm super honored to be here with you.
Did I pronounce Jamal correctly?
That's perfect. Jamal Jivanjee. Yep.
Jamal Jivanjee. What's the origin of that name ethnically and linguistically?
Absolutely. Yeah, my dad is his heritage is from India.
Ah,
So, but he grew up in a little island off the coast of Africa, East Africa, called
ah.
Zanzibar, which is now part of Tanzania. But his family is originally from, we're going back several generations, but originally from a state in India called Gujarat.
Ah,
So
ah.
that's
It's
where the
pretty
name
cool.
comes from.
Yeah, yeah. I know some.
Yeah,
I know some Gujarati people here in Montreal. Very, very nice people.
awesome.
So I think there's a Muslim population there, right? Gujarati, mostly
Oh
Muslim, or
yes. So my dad's family were Shia Muslims,
okay.
and hence the name Jamal, uh, which is typically it's traditionally an Arabic name, but
Do you know what
because
it
of the
means?
Islamic background, Jamal,
Yeah,
yeah, it means beauty
nice.
in Arabic, means beauty. And interestingly enough, Jivanji, it comes from the Hindi Jivan or Jivan. It means kind of like what we would say is the say ego, but your self, your temporary self. So Jivan is means self, and G means master. So
Ah.
Jivanji, which is interesting. I didn't know that till much later in life, and I thought, oh, that's
Well,
interesting.
G is also like the polite way of like almost like sir, or it's a
Sure.
respectful way of saying ji ha, ji nahi, whatever. So that's
Hmm.
fun. I learned a bit of Hindi just as a hobby. I dabble with languages sometimes. Learned a bit of Arabic. I studied Arabic actually at
Oh
school,
wow,
uh, just sort of an adult after school course type of thing. And
amazing.
I snuck in my Arabic friend, and the teacher was going around the class, getting us to do these little alphabetic, little simple exercises, and he's there perfectly
Mm,
fluent in Arabic and just pretending to be going along with the teaching. So it was fun. But yeah, the way I start my interviews is to go back in time, right to your childhood, and to talk about. You've already sort of given some context for family and
sure.
religion, but to talk about you personally, subjectively, how you came to understand that there's a God. Did you ever commit your life to God, or Allah, as we call him in Arabic? And uh,
Hmm.
and how did your journey take you maybe away from God or to a different understanding of God? Just maybe talk about the whole journey from childhood till today with all the ups and downs, twists and turns. Okay.
Well, that is a fantastic question. It's also a lot. So I have a lot I could say about that.
Yeah.
So you'll
Please
have
do.
to
Please do. Please do. Go ahead.
interject when you're able to break it up a little bit. But I have always, I feel like I came out of the womb curious, very curious, always asking questions as far back as I can remember. And some more context, my dad comes from a Shia Muslim background, but he was very uh, probably the best word to use is religious. I mean, he was not a cultural Muslim. He was a very, very active practicing Muslim. So when as far back as I can remember, I remember obviously in Islam, the day is centered around prayer. So, you have 5 times a day prayer. So I mean, every day my dad is very regimented, and so a lot of the structure of our home is around his prayer schedule. As soon as we were old enough to begin to learn how to pray, he taught. I have an older brother, and he taught my brother and I how to pray. So we would join my dad for prayers. We went to the mosque on the. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, is where I was born and raised, and in Columbus there was a mosque, and they would offer religious education classes on Sundays, just because of the culture. Typically, it would be on Friday, but we would go to the mosque on Sunday, and remember that. And then when I got a little bit older, my mother, who I'll talk about, she was a very devout Roman Catholic,
Oh.
and
Well,
she
the Shia Muslims are a little bit more Catholic than the Sunni, right? In terms of,
absolutely, yeah, absolutely,
hierarchy structure and just the way of doing things, and so
yep,
there's some
and
overlap there.
and more of a, I know in the Roman Catholic tradition, there's more of understanding of communion of the saints and or
Yep.
veneration of certain,
And
individuals and
infallibility, infallibility of our Pope and the bishops and all that,
sure.
you know?
And
It's pretty cool.
Shia Islam is very similar to that with the imams and that kind of thing. But my mother, she was a very devout Catholic, and there's a whole story in that she converted to Catholicism around when she was 18 years old. She was not raised in it and had a very profound experience that led her into Catholicism. And then she actually wanted to be a nun. She tried to join a convent, and interestingly, the priest had to she had to have a supporting priest of her parish to for her to join. And he was just very insightful, and he had a sense. He said, I think your faith is very strong, and I think you would make a great nun, but there's something inside that just tells me this is not quite the right fit for you right now. And he didn't approve her, and she was devastated. She was really. And then my dad, because he was living in East Africa at the time, he had joined this international organization where they pair you up. This is the late 60s, early 70s. So they paired. They were, he wanted a pen pal, and my mother also was seeking a pen pal around that same time. So they got paired up together. That's how they actually met, and they wrote letters, exchanged letters twice a month for 6 years. They had never met, and he proposed in a letter, literally. And there's a whole story in that. She accepted. They had never met. That's how they ended up.
Wow.
And he ended up making his way to the United States, and they eventually got married. But they agreed to disagree when it came to faith, right? Because she was devout Catholic and had no intention of, I mean, very, very, very strong. But she and he was very devout in his Islam, and they agreed, like, we're not going to try to proselytize or change each other. So, but then when the children came along, when my brother and I, this is where the conflict came in, because Islam, my dad just had this assumption, well, these are my sons, they're going to be Muslim. My mom said, oh no, they're going to be good Catholic. This is the United States. We're so they kind of tussled. So that's why they even fought over my name. So my first name is Jamal. My middle name is Michael. So they kind of compromised. You get the first name, I'll get the middle name. But this is a metaphor, kind of how I was brought up, always tussling for influence. So as soon as I got old enough to go to school, my mom enrolled us in Catholic schools. And I started to go to Catholic schools and to go to the mosque on the weekends. So it was confusing, to say the least, at some level, because I was always asking questions. I wanted to know why. What makes your faith different than your faith? What are the major differences here? And it was, the differences were around, how do we understand Jesus? Who is Jesus? That was a major question. So I was always watching and listening for the answers, trying to make sense of it. And I came to the conclusion early on that I was like, you guys both can't be right. That was just like, there has to be, like, I don't know who to pick, and I don't know which one to pick as to which one's correct. But I was okay with that. I just kind of let that be what it is. As far as my understanding of God, faith in God, it was just, it was never anything I doubted. I just had an awareness, it seemed, a deep awareness that there is more. There has to be more to this. I wanted to know if there was more. That was actually a major question. Um, a major, theme of my family's life was survival, because my dad came from the third world, or very difficult part of the world. He carried with him an existential kind of angst that I just picked up in him, a worry about survival, and just a constant struggle to live. I mean, you could pick up on that really early. And my dad, or my mother, came from a lot of generational poverty. So there was and some trauma, unprocessed trauma, and there was a lot of suffering that was going on in their lives. Looking back, I think my mother dealt with depression. I think she dealt with a lot of unprocessed trauma, just struggled in life. Both of them did. And I picked up on that. I was observing that, watching that. And one of the things I realized was that no matter what their faith background was, or what they were saying about God, it didn't seem, just the observations, their relationship, or their dynamic, their faith dynamic, didn't seem to touch the pain. It didn't seem to get to it, to heal it, to integrate it. And that took me many years to see that. But I observed that even as a child, I could see that the faith component seemed to be the side issue. The main issue is poverty. The main issue is struggle. It's just trying to survive. And my question, I was always asking the question, what are we doing here? Are we just here to earn some money, pay the bills? What happens after that? So if I'm going to like there are these watershed moments for all of us that we have, and I remember one of my watershed moments or major moments came. I was in the first grade. I think I was 6 or 7 years old, and I heard a story in school. There's it's kind of a nursery rhyme, but it's about an ant and a grasshopper, and it's the ant. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the ant is this diligent creature that is in the summer. He's going to the picnics where all the people are, and he's picking up crumbs and taking it back to his little den and storing it up, and just very diligent, working hard. But there's this grasshopper to contrast it. There's a grasshopper that is just partying, having fun, living it up, and is not doing what the ant's doing. And then the winter comes, and the ant is very cozy and warm in his little den and has all this food and everything's great. But the grasshopper is starving, basically, and has to come to the ant and asked to be bailed out, basically. So the moral of the story was, this is what, if you want to be successful in life, you need to be like the ant, not the grasshopper.
But if you want to have fun, be like the grasshopper.
Right. Totally. And that disturbed me. That I remember being in school feeling really disturbed because I was making the connections in my head. I was like, I know the ant. That's my dad. But I also was making the unconscious connection that, but my dad is miserable, but yet this is what we're being told, that this is the way it is to live. And so, and then of course, after the winter's over, the spring comes back, you do the same cycle all over, you get the food, it's kind of this Groundhog Day. You just kind of repeat this over and over and over. So I was scared. I came home from school that day. I thought, this is what life is. We're like these ants. If we're the grasshopper, we're gonna suffer immensely. So we have to be like the ant, but the ant doesn't seem like they're living either. So I went home and I had a conversation with my mom, and I said, Mom, and she wasn't aware of all of this. She wasn't aware of the story. I'm 6 years old. I don't really know how to communicate what I'm feeling. So I'm talking to my mother, and I said, Mom, why does Dad go to work every day? She said, what do you mean? I said, why does he have to? Is it a rule? Like, why does he go to work? And she said, well, he has to, this is how he gets money. And I said, why do we need money? He said, well, because we have to pay the bills. We have, this house costs money, food, utilities, all the things that cost money. I said, okay. So what happens once he gets the money? Then what? And she said, what do you mean then what? I said, what happens next? She said, well, this is how you live. I said, yes, but then what? She's like, what do you mean then what? I said, what happens after you get the money, you pay the bills, and we're living? Then what do we do? And she said, there's nothing. This is life. There's no then what. This is life. And then eventually we all die. And when she said that, I mean, the bottom energetically, at least it's the way it felt internally, it just dropped out. It confirmed my fears. I thought, feels like a joke. I don't know why somebody would put us here to do this. For what purpose? This seems aimless. So we're fighting and striving to survive, yet survive for what? When do we actually live? This doesn't feel like living. And that really deeply bothered me. I wouldn't say I was suicidal at 6, but my desire for life left me at that point, and it led to a lot of suffering. My mom told me, she said, Jamal, you're a child. You have enough, just be a kid, because you're going to have to think about these things when you become an adult. So don't rush to get there. And I thought, that's my greatest fear. So this is what I had to look forward to. So it was really, I started to struggle, and that there's a whole journey in that. This led to my teenage years. I got into, there was a massive void. I could sense this void. I was very spiritually hungry, looking for whatever that was. I didn't know that it was a spiritual drive for me, but this led me into drugs, relationships, early on, I developed a lot of addictive tendencies and patterns. This carried me through my teenage years, and then eventually, right around 17, 18 years old, there was a family that took an interest in me in my high school. I actually eventually got kicked out of the Catholic schools. So I ended up going to public school. In my high school where I went, there was, I had a reputation for being somebody that, kids' parents didn't want their kids hanging out with me. I was bad influence. So that reputation kind of grew. I had a lot of anger issues, but there was one particular family that took an interest in me, and their parents were like, "Bring Jamal over. We like him." And they invite me over for dinner. I got to know their family, their kids, and actually really felt adopted into their family in a very profound way. They showed me a lot of love, a lot of acceptance. They happened to also be very devout, born again evangelical Christians, and there was an angle there to influence me for their understanding of the gospel, and that was very successful. I was drawn into that, and I eventually became a born again Christian around 18 years old, and I also became a father at that time as well. I had a girlfriend that became pregnant. Just a lot of upheaval in my life at that time, trying to figure out who I am, what is my life, where am I headed. So that was a massive turning point in my life. And uh, a year and a half later, after graduating from high school, I became a corrections officer in a state penitentiary. That was also a very pivotal time in my life. I was growing in my new faith, immersed into the working world, immersed into a prison setting for money. I needed a job, paycheck, and that's an interesting metaphor. That was a metaphor, going to prison for money. Whole thing in that. So I did that for about 5 years, and I was some mentors and people in my life at that time that had been my spiritual mentors in this journey suggested that I go into ministry, that this would be a good fit for me. And I was getting very dissatisfied with my job as a corrections officer. And so I ended up going to college, studied religion, and eventually became a pastor. And I did that for also after college for about 5 years. We started a church community in Central Ohio. And but the whole time I've always questioning, even in that journey, I'm always asking the deeper questions, and wanting to get to the marrow, not just accept what I'm being told, but really get to the essence. And so after about 5 years of, being a pastor in this evangelical tradition, I'm getting to ask some questions like, when I would read the scriptures, the New Testament, and Jesus would talk about the kingdom of heaven, I was always asking, is this it? Is this what he was talking about? Is this the kingdom of heaven? This thing I'm doing here? And the answer was always no. No, it didn't. It seemed very dissatisfying. So that we were in my tradition, and we were always, and we would meet with pastors from around the city. We meet monthly. We talk about how is ministry going, and this is where I picked up on the metrics for success in the evangelical world, at least in my context, was what I call the 3 B's: buildings, bodies, and budgets. So a pastor would say, we're doing really well. We're growing. We got more people coming. Our budget's growing. We're building a new facility, whatever it may be. And this was seen as marks of success. And I understood that, and in many ways, it was very much like being an entrepreneur, building a company, and I picked up on all that, and we were doing well as a church, and but something deep inside of me said, "Is this it? This is the kingdom: buildings, bodies, and budgets." And it's deeply dissatisfying to me. So eventually, I took a sabbatical. I ended up traveling around the world for the purpose of just getting out of my world, my box. And I ended up spending some time in the Middle East. Eventually made my way to China, Tibet, Nepal, India, and just immersed myself in some communities there. And that was a life-changing, very kind of started the unraveling process for me of some of the the paradigms that I had bought into. And this led me, and so eventually I knew. So I'm condensing many years into this. This eventually led me to a point where I can no longer be a pastor in good faith, and so I ended up stepping away from that position, and transitioned and moved on to eventually to writing. But a backstory in all of this was there's a lot of the trauma from my parents that they had not dealt with, trauma, survival trauma, existential trauma, trauma from their own journeys. I mean, this was passed to me, and I didn't know that. I was really on the run for myself for many years. I was trying to figure out, who am I? What am I? These are all existential questions I was not aware that I was trying to address. I felt like if I could just do enough, be more. And so in my relationship with God, I kind of projected onto God my own trauma in that sense. This sense of a parent, of a father figure who was just a bit disappointed, just not quite, almost this father that was saying you could do a little more, you could be a little more, and always felt like I was falling short, not quite measuring up to the standard. This was a sensation. I wasn't aware of it. So this led to a very addictive. So I went from addiction as a teenager to substances, alcohol, illicit relationships. And when I became an evangelical Christian, I like to say now that I have a friend that says an addiction is a substance that keeps you from feeling what you need to feel or addressing what you need to address. It's the thing that just keeps you distracted to help you survive. It's a self-defense mechanism. So my relationship with God in many ways was the addiction. My ministry, so to speak, was the addiction. So I spent almost 20 years in my religious pursuit on the run for myself. And eventually, when I started to deconstruct some of these belief systems and go deeper and stepped away from my role as a pastor, so much of my life was rolled up in that position as a pastor. So when I left that profession and that identity, it caused a crisis of, who am I? What is it that makes me me? And a lot of this pain and trauma that I understand now to be generational came to the surface, and this caused a massive unraveling. And I've lost everything at that point. Went through a divorce, went through just a crisis at just about every level. And there was about a 2-year period of deep depression, darkness. It was hard to even get out of bed in the morning, hard to function. This is where my life started to get rebuilt, reconstructed. And I started to turn inward and address my pain, get conscious of some of these things. I had some help at the time. Coaches and different folks I would say the grace of God came into my life and really began to show me what was real, who the truth about who I am. And one of those things that was very instrumental in that journey for me, this 2-year period of darkness, was I remember one particular point I was actually suicidal, wanted to end my life, and had made plans to do that at one point. And I remember just being in that state one particular day, and I literally heard this voice deep inside. And this voice said, since you're so intent on wanting to die, why don't you do some research on people who have died and have come back to talk about their experience? And this was a new thought. I was like, where did that come from? But it caused a lot of energy. I could sense there was a lot of energy in that. There was curiosity. So I became very curious about this. So I started looking at people who have had what has now been called near-death experiences, NDEs. I actually wrote, there was a physician that wrote a book. He actually did some research, documented about 100 cases of people who could be clinically verified that they had literally experienced clinical death and had actually memories and things that could not be explained from beyond that after their death, in which they were verified as accurate memories of traveling to other places in the world and witnessing things that there was no way they could know, different things. And so he kind of put these stories in a book. I read the book. It was fascinating. I did a deep dive into that. And that was the beginning of restoration for me. And I started to learn a lot of things. A lot of these stories are very similar. People would talk about things they experienced post death that seem to transcend socioeconomic background, seem to transcend religious background. And there were some themes. And one of the themes that everybody talked about, that when they quote unquote died and left their body, they were encountered with a tremendous love that they did not know existed. This love was unconditional. They were confronted with their own life, their own, if you want to call it, sins. They were that was shown to them. They understood that a lot of that those sins came from not because they were evil, but because they were unaware, unconscious of the truth of who they were, the truth of the way life was, and they were made to be aware of how those actions affected others, even though it wasn't they did not experience condemnation, but understanding and a tremendous amount of love, and it changed their life. This experience for the folks that came back from this near death experience, they were profoundly different. And one of the things that was communicated to them was they weren't ready to die. It wasn't their time. This is why they're being sent back, because there was work left for them to. There was something that they needed to learn. There were things that they needed to do, and it just was not their time. And this profoundly affected me. It was as if those stories became my stories, and I realized this is not my time. This is not yet my time. I'm still here, and there's work for me to do. There's things for me to realize. And a massive lesson in all of this is I needed to learn how much I am loved, which I just had no idea the level of that. And also there were things I needed to do, a contribution to give to life and to the world from that love. And this was a process. It was about a 2-year process of just waking up to that, and it changed everything for me. So that led me in what I call the second half of life that I'm just getting into now. So there's a lot in that, I know. So that's
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of my journey
Very
in a nutshell.
fascinating. Yeah, fascinating
Yeah.
journey. Thank you for sharing all that. And just a couple little
Hmm.
follow-up questions that are more biographical, but
Hmm.
remind me if you told me, forgive me, but how many siblings do you have?
I have one brother. He's about a year and a half older than me.
Okay.
Yep.
And do you know, are you able to, without revealing too much, is he Christian, Muslim, atheist? Do you have any idea?
He's actually very devout Catholic. He kind of followed
Ah,
my mother's footsteps. You know,
oh,
he and I, we're a little bit different in the sense that he's a loving person, always wanting to serve and do well and help people. He, we seem to be different in the sense that I was always questioning everything, asking the deeper questions, wanting to know why, and he never seemed those questions didn't seem to be pertinent for him. He just kind of would adopt like he adopted Catholicism and just went into that. It went in that direction. Never really asked the deeper questions. Just this was his path, and he went down that road. For me, I'm always questioning. I want to know that this is the truth. I want to know this has to be. I'm always curious and questioning everything. So that's kind of how we're different in that
interesting.
sense.
Interesting. You get along though?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Totally. Absolutely. He
Would
lives
you?
in Ohio. I live in Southern California. So we don't see each other as often as I would like, but
Uh,
but we do talk regularly.
well, Ohio is very Catholic and California is very New Age, so I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you identify as New Age today or not, but you should definitely invite your brother onto my podcast. Just send him my email address, please, because it'd be fun to
Oh, for
chat. It
sure.
would be fun to chat with him, not because he's Catholic, but because he's your brother. You know what I mean? It's like just like,
Hmm.
does he look like you?
When we were younger, people used to think we were twins.
Oh,
He does look similar. There's a similar look. He has more hair than I have. So,
you could get a wig, but yeah. So what about the reaction of family and friends when it comes to all the twists and turns of your journey? I mean, that's pretty incredible for one person to go through all that in terms of like trying to figure stuff out. So pretty dramatic. What was the reaction? Positive, negative, neutral? They don't care what?
yeah, it's a great question. My mother. She passed in 2021. She was always very, very understanding. She was just somebody who held a lot of space. She could hold space for you, even though she's very strong in her faith and very devout. I was very open, and I would ask her a lot of questions, challenge a lot of ideas and beliefs that she would, bring up and question things. And um, but she was always very patient, very just full of grace and understanding. And we had great conversation. We got along really well. My dad. This is interesting about my father. When he was a devout Muslim, and I became a devout evangelical born again Christian, that caused a lot of conflict because in my worldview at the time, he was um, lost and in danger. And so I was always, and my dad was devout, so I was a crazy teenager, drinking, drugs, sex, all kinds of things. And he was very, culturally, even that was very shameful for me to do that. But he was also very worried as a father, worried about me. And in his tradition, he would pray for me. So when I became this evangelical Christian and I started talking like, Dad, you need Jesus, he really took offense to that. He's like, I need Jesus. He said, first of all, as a Muslim, we honor Jesus. He's one of our revered prophets, and we follow the teachings of all the prophets. And you're telling me I need Jesus? Look at your life. Look how you've been living.
Yeah.
And he just could not understand that or comprehend that. And of course, I wasn't aware of how offensive that was, and it was very brash and some of that. And so this went on for years, and just proselytizing kind of a thing. Now where I am today. So in this journey, my dad eventually becomes Catholic. He became a
What?
Roman Catholic.
No
Yep,
way.
that's a whole story in that, which is very unlikely. My dad was, I'll die a Muslim. I was born a Muslim. I'll die a Muslim. It's very something you don't do, but he did. He converted to Catholicism in my adult years, as he's getting older, and he embraced it 110%. I mean, he becomes devout. They actually, my mom and dad joined a very, what's considered to be a conservative order of the Catholic Church, and he just dove in, and he's still living. He's very devout. Now, his approach was a lot different. He said, of course, he's watching my journey, from evangelicalism to deconstructing a lot of those beliefs and moving in a very different direction. I don't know what's going on with you. Used to talk to me about Jesus all the time. I have adopted Jesus. I've joined the true church, and you're just lost. And I don't understand. So he was and he's still to this day, we'll have conversations, and he's not really aware of where I'm at spiritually. He's not very curious in that sense, but he feels that he found the truth and I left my faith, so to speak. I mean, that's kind of his perspective on things. So
Wow.
that's his take on things.
Wow.
My mother did not see it that way. She had a very different take on it. So
Wow. Well, I'm gonna ask you to extend an invitation to your dad too. I mean, I know he's old, but getting on there in years, but I'm sure he has a lot to say. But if I do talk to any of your family members, it's not going to be talking
sure.
behind your back about you. It's going to be talking about them, their perspective, the journey, and wow, what a journey your dad went on. Wow. I hope
Yeah.
he's done. I hope he's done now with the the twists and the turns.
He does seem to be done for
But
sure.
he seemed done before. He seemed like he was done before. So no, but
Yeah.
only God knows the heart. But the thing about being Catholic is that we, like you said, your mom gives a lot of space. We give a lot of space to people because God is patient. We are patient.
Mhm.
God respects your free will. We respect your free will. It's just when we think about God, we have to be like Him. We have to be perfect like Him. Of course, it's impossible, but we have to try. So fascinating. So wow, what a family, what a journey. And what's this book that you've written, Living for Living? What is that all about?
Yeah, so my one of the themes, as I mentioned before, of my struggle, was like, what's the point of why are we here? What are we doing here? And watching my parents and their struggle and their generational kind of dynamics, it seemed to me that we were here. That they wouldn't say this, obviously, but it seemed what I picked up on was we're here to survive. We're here to pay the bills, earn money, live, just so we can survive. And my lifelong quest was, but what if we want to live? What does it mean to live? And of course, Even Jesus made this statement in his teachings. He said, I've come that you might have life, but not just have it, but have it abundantly. That was always something I was passionate about. Like, what is the abundant life? And of course, is it money? Is it wealth? Is it, all these things? And it took me a long time to realize that no, the abundant life is the life. First of all, life. Where does life happen? This is a lot of my work now. Where does life happen? Well, life always happens on the inside. It doesn't happen on the outside. We experience the outside world, but whatever we experience it internally. So if life is flowing well on the inside, it feels very abundant. Jesus made the statement. He said, if you're tired and heavy laden, worn down, learn from me, because my yoke is easy, my burden is light. This is a profound, it was always perplexing. I'm like, wow, Jesus, all the problems he had, all the things he went through, the way life felt for him was, for the most part, there was an ease and a lightness there. So abundance is living. And, one of the things that gets in the way of that is the mechanism of survival, of needing to survive. And so a lot of the book I've written, Living for a Living, addresses this dilemma. And it's really my own journey moving from a life that was just continuing the pattern of my family dynamic, which was survival, living to survive, to actually living for a living. And when people would ask the question, I was always frustrated as a kid. People say, what do you want to do for a living? And I remember just thinking, like, always questioning. I'm asking the question, well, wait, what do I do for a living? I was like, when I see my parents, to give you an example, my mother, she worked 30 years at this job. She worked for the state of Ohio, and it was a great job in the dynamic there. That's like, it's like hitting the lottery. If you get a good, stable job that has benefits, I mean, you're set for life. My mother had that. And she worked my whole life in this job, but she hated her job so much. I remember there were mornings she would literally vomit before she'd go to work. This is the sense of just absolute dread she had every day because of she was not happy with her work, her life in many ways. So I looked at that and I said, this is not living. Now I appreciate the struggle. She did the best she could with her perspective and what she knew to do, but she didn't have any other options in her world. But I looked at that and I said that I made a decision early on that I will not trade my life for survival. I want to live for a living. So the book is about my journey into actually what it means to live for a living. And a lot of it's based upon what Jesus taught in Matthew 6. There's this passage in the New Testament where he says to his disciples, one of his first things he actually unpacked for them before he got into his ministry. Really, first thing he did, he said, look at the world, look at what they do. Everybody's concerned about basically survival. What are you going to eat? What are you going to wear? He's like, it's not going to be this way for you. And then he did this teaching, like look at nature, right? Look at the birds, look at the lilies, right? Look at how nature is so abundant. And then he said, how much more valuable are you if the birds, like if every bird is, God is aware of every little bird, and they are not toiling and trying to figure out, they're not storing up in barns, and they're not doing all the things that we do because of a fear of not being able to survive. And he said, how much more valuable of you? He said, if you would just, and he used the language, seek first the kingdom of God, which is, I've always been intrigued about, what is this thing called the kingdom? He's like, if you'll seek that first, then other places, he said, the kingdom of heaven's within you. Right. This is a provocative thing. Like, what do you mean it's in here? And he's telling this to people, like Jewish people, that were waiting and had been waiting for quite a long time, thousands of years, for this Messiah to come and usher in this new kingdom. And he shows up and says, it's already here. It's in your midst. And then he said, it's within you, which is perplexing to them. Like, well, we don't see it. But he said, if you'll seek first that dimension of life, and everything you need will be provided for you. And that's in Matthew 6. And I have come to understand that that's actually true. That went from being a belief of mine to an experience of mine. And it's been a lifelong journey where I learned to experience that when we're in alignment with this dimension inside of us that we call the kingdom of God, people can say put a lot of terms on what that is, but there is the source of your life and the source of where God comes from and the source of where you come from. It's all on the inside. It's all there. And when you're in alignment with that, and then you begin to live and work from that place, it's almost like the universe or life will just give you what you need to do this work. And it sounds almost too good to be true, but that has been my experience, and I am very passionate about that message, and that's what the book "Living for a Living" is about. That journey.
Yeah, this ain't my first rodeo. I've talked to a lot of people, so I tend to boil things down pretty abruptly to a couple of different categories. And one of the ways I categorize worldviews is when it comes to God and when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
not God. So as a
Yep.
monotheist, I believe in both. I believe in God, and I
Mm.
also believe in not God. For example, I am not God, you are not God.
Mm.
So I do
Mm.
believe that you exist, I exist. We're creatures of God, but we are not God. So I believe in God. I also believe in not God. But when I interview Hindus, Buddhists, and
Yep.
New Age people, they only believe in God. They do not believe in not God. They believe in
Yeah.
the illusion of not God, the Maya,
Mm.
but they don't believe in the reality. The ultimate reality is
Mm.
only God. There is no eternal hell. There is no eternal separation. Separation is just an illusion. So, does that describe you?
That's a great question. My understanding of the teachings of Jesus would lead me to that conclusion. Yes. So for example, and again, I understand that's what would separate me from most, you know,
Monotheist.
traditional
Mhm.
Christianity. Yeah, monotheism in that sense. There's a Catholic priest. I don't know if you're familiar with. He's a Franciscan. His name is Father Richard Rohr,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so Father Richard Rohr has been, a big influence in my thinking along the way as well. And one of the things that he taught, so the term is, it's not pantheism, but it's panentheism in the sense that that God is seen. So how do we conceptualize God? My understanding before was that God is a being, a supreme being among or above all other beings. You know, and I would say the best way for me to understand God now is that God is not a. I don't see or understand God as a being among other beings, but it is the ground and source of all being. So when it's the question is who when we say I, when I refer to myself as myself, well, which self am I referring to? Because there's a self that has I can trace it to my lineage, right? My mother, my father. But then there's a self that seems to go beyond that, right? There's a self that seems to be spiritual in nature. So the question is, when we say spirit, right? So what are the dimensions of spirit? Well, one of the dimensions of spirit, is that it transcends space and time. So, like for example, when Jesus would start to refer to himself in a different vernacular, he would say, "Then I must be about my father's business." Of course, he's not talking about Joseph, or not talking about carpentry,
Carpentry.
right? But which they, it was hard to understand. And then eventually, he's like, "Who are my mother? Who is my mother and my brothers?" And I understand he's not denying his physical mother, his earthly mother, but he's almost referencing himself from beyond this physical lineage. And then one time he was talking to the religious leaders, and he was referring to Abraham in a certain way, and like almost as a contemporary. And they said, "You're not even 50 years old. How do you speak of Abraham like you know him?" Basically, and he says, "Well, before Abraham was born, I am." And I mean, this was Abraham that lived, thousands of years before Jesus. So, I mean, that was a ridiculous statement to them. So they picked up rocks. Of course, he used the word "I am," and he's referring to himself in the divine. And they pick up rocks to try to kill him. And he says, "For what, for what good work are you going to stone me?" And he says, and they said, "No, we're not going to stone you for a good work, but because you, being a mere man, make yourself out to be God." And he says, actually, the scripture says this about all of us. And he quotes from the Old Testament passage. There's actually a psalm in the Old Testament in which it's kind of this. It's a very mystical dialogue that God is having. Now, I think the more Jewish understanding, in the way it's translated from the Hebrew, is that it says God is speaking to. Um, the understanding is that angels or something. It says, but why do you? But it's literally translated. God is speaking to the gods. Gods. Why do you permit this injustice on the earth? How long will you do this? Do you not know? Do you not realize that you all are gods? Gods. And it's an interesting twist because It seems to be. He's making a statement. And Jesus' response was like, "This is all of our nature." Gods. Now, children of God, thinking of ourselves as children of God, that means we're an extent. What are children? Children are an extension of the source. So if we are children of God, there is a dimension to us that is literally, I look at that's like rays of the sunshine, right? A drop of the ocean. Well, if I take a drop of water out of the ocean, I don't say that's the entire Pacific Ocean right there in this little cup I may have, but is that the Pacific Ocean? Well, yes. It's just not all. Is there more to the Pacific Ocean? For sure. But the drop of water from the Pacific Ocean is yet still the Pacific Ocean because it's the same substance. So what I understand, this has just been my understanding, is that what I understand Jesus to be saying is that your real nature is spiritual in nature. Your source is the divine, is God, and we may use terms like children of God, but you are of the same essence. So there's also a dimension, a part of us that is created, which some people would call that the flesh, some people would call it the ego, some people would call it this construct. But that created character, so to me, Jamal used to be this, this is my father, this is my mother, this is my story, this is my programming. But I realized after many years that was just a construct in the mind, that wasn't even real. Actually, most of my suffering and existential crisis was coming from this character that is separate, and I think Paul the apostle in one of his writings says that we were enemies of God in our mind. So this is the mind that needs to be renewed. This the mind it's the mind that has not yet been renewed, and so it's not aware of its identity, the true identity. So when Jesus is referencing himself as being this divine figure, and then he turns around and says, "But this is true of all of us." That's my understanding. It does blur the lines a bit.
Yeah. The problem is when you go down that route,
Mhm.
as many people do. I mean, it's like I said, probably about half my guests believe what you believe. Some of them claiming to be ostensible Christians too, which is strange. But when you go away from monotheism to monism, you have eliminated morality, because there may be the illusion of morality, right? There may be the illusion that our choices matter, but the ultimate reality is that you have nothing at stake. There is no danger. You are not in danger of burning in eternal hellfire, because there is no such thing. There's no reality to hell. So the problem with monism, I mean, I love monism. It's wonderful, and in a sense, it's true. In a sense, it's true that there only is God, and that nothing can perturb God. He's infinitely joyful and blissful, and nothing can ever perturb him or surprise him or anything else. In a way, that is true, but the truth of monism has to be put in the context of monotheism, and we have to acknowledge the reality that we are separate creatures, that we are not God, and that there are stakes. The stakes are high, and we can end up in hell if we don't play our cards right. So that's the problem that I have with the Eastern philosophies, the Eastern religions, the New Age, and all the rest. Is that if you're right, great. If you're right, if you're God, great. Congratulations, you're God. But if you're not, then wow, what a deception that you've fallen prey to, because hell is real and you're in grave danger. So I say this to all my Hindu friends, Buddhist friends, and New Age friends. It's like, if you're right, great. But what if you're not? You like to ask questions. You like to challenge. You like to push back. Well,
Mhm.
I'm questioning you. I'm challenging you. Like, what if you're wrong?
Mhm.
What if hell is real? What if you're on your way to hell? The highway to hell is broad and pleasant, right? And if you feel happy and content that you found this broad way, it's no wonder. I'm a Christian. I'm struggling, like your parents, with the drudgery of work. I hate my job. I hate the world, because I love God, and I know that every evil in this world is a result of sin, actual sin, but also original sin. So it's two very different worldviews. Mine is very uncomfortable, and if you found yourself a nice, comfortable place, I'd be very careful. I would question that. So how do you respond to all that?
Hmm. But I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing your perspective there. And I I understand it because I've lived most of my life there. I totally understand that. I understand my, morality. You're right about morality. I don't think we need it personally, because it's a guardrail. It's like, all right, we have to here's some guardrails. Like if you don't have guardrails, you can go off the road and go to if you're driving, using a driving analogy, you'll go off the road and you may be on the side of a mountain. You'll end up that's not going to be good for you. So we need guardrails, and that's what I hear you saying with morality. They help us stay on this path, and I get it. And that's where law comes from. The idea of law, spiritual law, religious law kind of thing comes from. But I go back to what Paul says though. When Paul says the fruit of the spirit is love, is joy, is peace, is patience, kindness. Against such things there is no law. Another way of saying there's no law needed when you're governed by this. Now the question is, let's think about spirit for a moment. We say, what are the dimensions of spirit, right? So, well, in spirit, the idea, like let's for example, let's say we blew up two balloons. I like this analogy. Blow up two balloons, and one balloon I write, my name on it, Jamal, and the other balloon we write your name on it, David. We'll put those two balloons up there. We could say this is me and this is you, and there's distinction. And at one level, that's correct, right? This is my body. This is your body. We have different bodies. I'm here in California. You're in Canada. We have separate bodies. Totally get it. Two different balloons. But if the balloon gets popped, right, and the balloon goes away, which is the body goes away, which it does, then what's left? Well, whatever's inside that balloon. Well, really, what is that balloon? The balloon is simply a container for what's inside of it. What's inside of it is air. Now, we can no longer say this is my air and this is your air. So the distinctions break down at that when we go beyond the physical. This is my understanding of what spiritual means, going beyond the physical. When we go beyond the physical, the essence is now we're talking about this concept of oneness or sameness. So when Jesus says, when he talks about love one another, the true ethic, right? This a new commandment, which I've always been intrigued by. What makes it new? It's not like the old, right? It's not like the old commandments. He's coming from the Jewish context. We have the 10 commandments. We have all the other commandments that go along with that. So he's saying a new commandment I give to you, that you would love one another in the same way that I have loved you. Or another iteration of it is to love one another as yourself. It's not even like yourself, but as yourself. So the question is like, oh, so love. So I'm convinced we're inherently selfish people. I don't actually see a problem with selfishness unless it excludes others. Now, if it excludes others, then it's a problem. Now, why would I exclude others from myself if I actually see them as distinctly separate? If I see them as separate, which is to be unconscious to their true nature, which is we are spiritual in nature. Everybody is spiritual in nature, no matter what you believe. Everybody's. My understanding is that we're spiritual, meaning all you have to do is go to a funeral, look at a body, and you realize people say it all the time. They're not there. Everybody recognizes that that's not them. Well, who have I been dealing with the whole time then? Their spirit that comes through the body. So when I see people through the lens of spirit, I would no longer see them as separate. If I understand them as being the same essence as me, then to be selfish is actually to include them, to love them as myself. This is actually a very selfish thing to do, to love another person as self. The only way I can truly do that is if I understand them at a fundamental nature, if I perceive them as literally being me. Now, this is what Jesus referred to when he said, in that day, I'll say to you, come, welcome. And then he's like, why? And he's like, well, because when I was sick, you took care of me, and when I was naked, you clothed me, and when I was hungry, you fed me. And he said, when did we do this for you? He said, when you did it for anybody, you did it for me, because there's no distinction. And at that level, there's no separation there. And I actually think that is what makes, so there's no morality, like Paul says, there's no law needed when you're governed by spirit, because spirit recognizes itself in everything. That's my understanding of that.
Yeah. So again, just to reemphasize my point, which is always my point, when I speak with someone from the East or in the New Age, my point is that it's all well and good if you're correct, but what if you're not?
Yeah.
What if Christianity is true? What if Islam is true? What if Judaism is true? They all preach the eternal hellfire, right? So, monism is great if it's true, but what if it's not true? What if monotheism is true? So I'm concerned about you that you're just assuming. It's a sort of form of presumption that you're in. You can do no wrong. And yes, you're going to tell me, as they always do, you're going to tell me, well, we have to be good for goodness sake, and this sort of Epicurean approach to self-fulfillment. Yeah, great. But the reality is that if you don't have faith, hope, and love in God as a transcendent being, as someone separate from you, then you're in danger of hellfire, right? Like that's the message of monotheism. So I'm just wondering, are you comfortable where you're at, or is there part of you that's questioning, or are you done with the questioning and now you're just settled into this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate the question. I I so I want to draw a brief distinction between beliefs and faith because I don't think they're the same thing. So beliefs are my understanding of a belief is that it's more like an educated guess, right? In a sense of like, let's say I've met 10 people that that know you. I've never met you. But people say, David's amazing. He's, very, very generous, very, thoughtful, all these different things. And, I may hear that. I met so many people that said that. I may form a belief that says, it's logical for me to have the belief that David is this kind of a person, But do I know that? I don't really know that because I haven't experienced that. Now, let's say I experience you. Well, is it a belief? It's I'm married, and do I believe my wife exists? I don't know that I would say believe. I don't think it's the correct word. I would say I'm aware. There's an awareness. There's a perception of her existence. So beliefs, there's a quality about belief is that whatever you believe, it's of the mind, right? Beliefs are held at the level of mind. Beliefs can come and go. They can be erased. You're not born with them. When you're born, you don't believe anything. But there can be an awareness of something that goes beyond belief. Now, faith, what is faith? My understanding of faith, they oftentimes are used synonymously with each other. My understanding of faith is that it goes beyond the dimension of belief, that it's actually a level of perception. Now, in the Bible, in the New Testament, and there's a verse which I like a lot when it comes to understanding faith. It actually comes out of Hebrews chapter 11. I think it's verse 1. It says, "Now faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the assurance of things unseen." This is really interesting. So it's like it's not seen in the physical, it's not understood with the mind in the same way, like because the mind, all the mind does is it's gathering data from the senses, what I see, what I hear, what I taste, what I touch, and so it's coming up with these constructs of belief systems. This is how the world is. But my understanding of faith is that faith is not that. Faith is a dimension of perception. It is perception, but not perception from the physical eyes, but almost a different kind of sight that comes from the spirit. Now, that it is very much an awareness and a perception. And when we live by that faith, there's a different quality to it. It does not feel like belief because beliefs can be doubted. They can be questioned. There's a shakiness to them. We can feel it internally. They're not rock solid. You can rethink things. And again, nothing wrong with beliefs. I'm a fan of beliefs. Beliefs are part of being human. But faith is not that way. Faith is revelatory. It comes from the internal. It goes beyond the physical nature of life. And there is a rock solidness in that. It's just an awareness. And a lot of this understanding that I have now, I would have looked and said, man, this is totally heretical. 20 years ago, I would have never come here, but all I can say is that these are just things that feel revelatory to me in nature. They're an awareness. And it's so I don't question them in that sense. The questions have gone away because there's just an awareness. And now this is just an experience. People say, do you still believe in God? And I say, no, not really. But I'm aware of the divine. I'm aware of God. It's a very different sensation, different experience. It may sound like semantics to some people, but to me, there's a world of difference in that.
Yeah, and for the record, I do want to say I'm not coming down hard on you, because I'm sincerely worried about your eternal destiny. It's not that. It's just like we're talking about, comparing and contrasting. I think God loves you. God has a plan for you. But and you could waltz right into heaven. You could waltz right into the Christian heaven because you love goodness for goodness sake. That might be the case, right? But that's not what my church teaches me is the safest path. The safest path is to submit to the church, right? So again, I'll ask you again, and I hope to get a straight answer. What if Christianity turns out to be true? Hell is real, and I mean, just do the thought experiment. Like, you've been there, you've been Christian allegedly. So take yourself back to that mindset and just think now from your current perspective, what if I'm wrong and Christianity is true and hell is real? Just think about that. What if Christianity is true? How do you feel about that? Play with the idea.
I would be very disappointed in that existence. It's kind of like the ant and the grasshopper, right? If I found out that we were here to be ants, I would be very disappointed. So, like, for example, if if I found out that the source of all of creation, God, would literally subjected his creation to murder or torture
No,
for
God
all of
didn't do that. God
eternity.
didn't do that. Sin did that. It was original
Mm,
sin and actual
yeah,
sin. It's not God's fault. It's not God's fault. Like I
right.
said to my friend in the live chat, he said hell is real, but did God create it? And I said, no, sin created hell. Sin created hell. God created a perfect paradise for us. God wants
Mm,
heaven for us. And what is heaven? Heaven is exactly what you think that you have already, which is being
mm,
in contact with God, being in the life of God, right? So
right.
hell is the creation of sin. And it's a separation. It's a real separation. It's not the illusion of separation. It's real separation. So I mean, let me just ask you very bluntly: if Christianity is true and the God of monotheism is the one true God, and it's a possibility theoretically that you end up in hell, do you think that you would avoid hell just because of your path that you're on, that you love goodness and you have all these noble virtues and these sorts of things? Or would part of you think, well, maybe if Christianity is true, maybe I should go back to looking at the Christian way of life, and what does Christ want for me? Why did Christ come to earth and build a church, right? So it's a lot to ask you. Maybe you should go away and think about it if you want. I mean, I'm not forcing you. I'm not giving you homework, but I'm just curious, because you've been Christian before and now you're not. And you know,
Well,
for me,
when I
hell
say
is real.
say the term Christian, I hold that very loosely because I don't feel like I've left Jesus or the teachings of Jesus. I actually feel like I understand them now. Versus before, I look at everything by fruit, right? That's just how I look at it. That's the only way we can judge whether something's
Bananas, apples,
truth.
oranges. Just kidding.
No, not quite like that. Like fruit in the sense of like when Jesus says a true teaching, a good teacher bears good fruit, bad teacher bears bad fruit. Now the question is, what's the fruit? Well, fruit, when we think of fruit of the spirit, of this, which is we're talking about, this is a spiritual dimension here. We're talking about there is a certain quality to it, right? So like when the fruit of the spirit we know is love or peace or patience or kindness, right? Even the apostle John says there is no fear in love. So to be governed by fear of hell, to a fear of destruction, to me runs antithetical from this dimension of the fruit. So when I'm governed by fear, I make the worst decisions. It actually keeps me from accessing this dimension called love, because fear and love, they are literally diametrically opposed to each other. So I don't see the teachings of Jesus. I don't see Jesus, first of all, being governed by fear. I don't think he was afraid of his eternal destination and where
Well,
he was going to
Jesus
end up.
said, don't fear the devil, fear God, because God's the one who can cast you into hell, right? And fear is the beginning of wisdom. It's only the beginning, and perfect love casts out fear, yes. Uh, you know, but, we are to be perfect. We are to live in that perfect love. But as Jesus said, for man it's impossible. For God it's not impossible, but for man it's impossible. So it's a submission. It's like in Islam, the submission, total submission to the will of God.
Mm.
And so yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to have you back because unfortunately I have to wrap it up here. I have to let you go. But it's been fascinating, very fascinating meeting you, hearing your story, and I don't love your New Age Eastern approach to philosophy, but I love you as a person, and I'll be praying for you and enrolling you in a perpetual mass, so you get a lot of graces from that. And above all, I appreciate that you came and shared with me, and you put up with my probing questions. And I hope you'll do your equivalent of prayer for me. Although I can't imagine what that would be like if you already assume that I'm in. There's no danger for me, right? So why would you? I guess you could just send me good vibes or send me love or enlightenment
Well,
or
I do
whatever.
think hell is real.
Oh,
I
you
want to go
do?
on the record and say,
Oh,
yeah.
oh,
I don't say hell doesn't exist. I
it's
just don't
eternal.
see
You
it in,
can't get out. It's eternal and you can't get out.
well, it's just like heaven, in the sense that when is heaven?
Well,
Eternal. When we get away from time, what is time? Even we look at time, right?
yeah, hell's outside of time. Hell is outside of time, and you
Yeah.
can't get out of it.
So
That's the problem. You can't get it. Once you're in, you
yeah.
can't get out, and it's horrible. That's the problem.
Well, so in this moment, people are either suffering
Yeah,
or they're experiencing peace and bliss and joy and happiness. So, my understanding is that God so loved the world, right, that he sent his expression, his full expression to humanity so that we would not perish but have eternal life. And I see that as a very present tense reality. That's always present. It's always present tense. If you die today, one of the things I talked about is that, when people have these near death experiences and they died, what they always talked about, they were surprised. They said, there is no death. I'm still me. There is still a consciousness. There's still an awareness. Now, you know, to be reconciled to God, in my understanding, happens at the level of our mind, not at the level of spirit, because there is no separation there. But when I was in a delusion for many years, thinking that I was alone. Where is God? God is not here. And I think Jesus entered that delusion for us on the cross, as one of the reasons he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't think God forsook Jesus at all. But I think that was his experience. And what was he doing? He was experiencing our own, as a priest would, our own dilemma in that moment. And I actually had an experience of that one at one point in time. I remember feeling absolutely alone, not to go into the whole thing, and we're wrapping up here, but I remember being absolutely alone and rejected in my own journey. And a lot of things were happening. And then there was a moment of clarity in which, and I look at this as being the grace of God, just in that moment, that just showed me, like, practically there were like 4 or 5 people, even though I felt deserted by all these people, there were like 4 or 5 people that were immensely, like, suffering with me and concerned about me and with me. And in that moment, I was aware of that. Oh, I am not alone. That even in my own delusion of thinking I'm alone, these people are with me. And that broke this barrier of separation in my mind, feeling all alone. I felt absolutely like, oh my gosh, I'm so loved in this moment. And it was just a perspective shift. It was a shift in perspective. And that's why I think, in order for us to understand the kingdom of heaven, there has to be this level of repentance. So John the Baptist would talk about repentance. He said, repent is why that was preceded the message of the kingdom was repentance. Because what does repentance mean? The original word for repentance in the Greek means to change your mind, to have a shift in mindset. So the mind has to shift in our perception. So I actually think the end of hell is when the perception of separation is evaporated. When we understand there is no separation, this is when hell ceases for a person in the experience.
yeah, and it's inevitable, because the ultimate reality is God. It's inevitable that any, separate, being. I don't know how many beings you think there are. Do you think there's only one being, or do you think there are multiple beings, or?
Well, it just depends on which dimension we're talking
Yeah,
about. So on this dimension, there's many
ultimately.
beings.
Yeah, but
No, it's just
ultimately,
one. There's just
yeah,
life.
yeah.
Yeah, there's just life.
So that's it. So you don't believe in that. You don't believe in the same hell that I believe in, but it's all right. It's all good. It's all good. And it's just that monism thing, which, again, I said, in a certain sense, from God's perspective, it's true. It is true for God, but it's not true for true for us. It's not the whole picture. It's not the whole picture. The part of the picture is missing for you, and that part of the picture is that you are in danger. You are a separate creature, and you're not the creator. You are not the creator. You're a creature, and you're in danger. So I'll leave it there. I mean, this is not to be negative or anything. It's just to sort of share my perspective. And of course, if you're right, then all my worrying is for nothing, right? Like, all my anxiety, all my
That would be
striving
good
for
news.
virtue. Yeah, that would be very good news, right? So if I'm wrong,
Which
Great. If you're
But
wrong,
see, this
not
to
so
me is
great. Not so great. If you're
what the
wrong, it's not so
gospel,
great.
right? It's not good news, but I understand the gospel to mean good news. It's
Of
good
course,
news.
of course, of course. There is good news. There's also bad news. So listen, I really want to keep talking to you. I do, but I have to go. I promised the wife
Yep.
I'd help her with something today. She's sketching out a picture of Styx, Hexenhammer 666, who's a Satanist friend of mine that has a live stream. He's got his own channel. He's been doing for like 20 years now or something. But she's sketching. She's having trouble sketching, so I'm gonna help her with that. But I really appreciate meeting you. You're a very pleasant man with a lot to say, and you're sensitive and insightful. And I hope you come back. And I also hope that you'll extend an invitation to your brother and your father. That would be amazing. That would be amazing to meet them.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for your graciousness. Thank you for your flexibility, for having me on your show and having these conversations. I know it takes a lot of work to do what you're doing, so I just honor you in that, and I appreciate that. Thank
Not a
you.
problem. Do you have your own podcast? I believe you have your own podcast, right?
I do. I do have a podcast. It's called The Love Cast with Jamal, and
Cool. Can
yeah,
they
it's
find
all.
that on your link that I put in the description? Are they able to find
Yeah,
that
they sure
there?
can. Yeah, all that's there on the
Have you
website for
enjoyed
sure.
Podmatch? Because that's where you and I met. Podmatch. Have you met a lot of people?
Yeah, I've really loved Podmatch. I think it's a great resource for connecting with folks like yourself that are doing this work. It's been amazing. I totally recommend it.
You've done it as a guest and as a host. You've used it both ways.
Yep. Yep.
And
Totally.
what percentage of the people that you've met and interacted with have been Christian versus sort of New Age or life coaches?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe half.
Ah,
Yeah,
wow.
a good
50
mix,
50,
good mix
50
of folks.
50. Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I
I
found.
would say.
That's what I found. I'm a little
Yeah,
bit surprised how Christian it is. A lot of Christian, a lot of Christians on Podmatch, but it's because the creator is Christian. I interviewed him,
yeah. I was gonna
Alex.
say that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Totally. I think he's motivated by from his faith, and I think just his circles and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of people out here that I think folks to create a show like yours, to do what you're doing do it regularly with quality. Like it takes you have to be driven by something, and I find that when you're driven by wanting to help and love and serve people and bring the truth to people, like it's naturally going to attract these kinds of folks together. And so that's what I found in Podmatch for sure.
a lot of good people. It's been amazing. So
Yeah.
again, great to meet you. Thank you so much, and let's try to keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon. Okay?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
God
Take
bless you.
care.
Take care. Bye
You
bye.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.